Welcome to the P.A.S. Report podcast. If you're tired of censorship, outraged by government abuses, and thirsty for real insights, then you're in the right place. Get ready, because here, the fight for freedom never ends. Here's your host, Professor Nick Giordano.
What's up, everyone? Welcome to the P.A.S. Report podcast. This is your host, Nick Giordano. I'm glad you could join me today. Make sure you follow and subscribe to the podcast so you never miss an episode. Also, visit the P.A.S. Report website, pasreport.com, and share this episode with your family and friends. I have on a very important guest today, someone that's been fighting the good fight for a while now, pushing back against the Marxist agenda, and more importantly, talking about faith and why we need to rediscover it as a nation. She just put out a new book, God-Given or Bust, Defeating Marxism and Saving America with Biblical Truths. Cheryl Chumley is here. Cheryl, thanks for joining me. How are you today?
Thank you so much for having me. It's great to be with you.
Well, I'm glad you could be on again. You know, when we talk about the foundation of American rights, and in your book, God-Given or Bust, you emphasize the need to get back to this idea that our rights are God-given. It's not like decreed through the government. Unfortunately, too many people today believe the government grants us our right to express our liberties. Could you elaborate on how the principle of God-given liberties, why it's so important, and then when in recent decades did it start to tail off where people look to the government for their rights as opposed to just understanding that they're inherent within us?
So the question of why it's so important, it's really quick to sum up this way. We either have God-given rights and liberties or we have government-granted rights and liberties. There really is no in-between. The two can't coexist for long. We're either drifting down a path of government-granted rights and liberties, which is just another way of saying that government controls, leading down a path to socialism, communism, Marxism, or we have the individual freedoms that founding fathers gave us. And if you want to know how those play out, just read the Declaration of Independence, right? That we hold these truths to be self-evident, that we have certain unalienable rights from the Creator, and governments are only put in place to preserve and protect those rights and liberties that we have at birth. So the whys of why it's so important, it's the foundation of American exceptionalism. That's what makes our country so different, distinct, and better than any other nation in the world. And where we started to drift, that's a really good question, because I look at this all the time. And, when you've been on my podcast, I think we've even discussed it before. And it seems to me that a lot of people point to the 60s, right? There was a real deviation from the moral compass, moral truths and moral absolutes that were just embraced by everybody of all political walks in life. And then the 1960s came and they threw all that out the window. It started becoming norm to just buck and rebel against anything that was traditional, anything that was biblical, anything that was moral and virtuous. And so from there, we've had the Democrat Party really exploit this sort of immorality for political use to seize political power.
It's amazing because you bring up the Declaration of Independence, and I'm currently teaching it to my students going line by line. And what amazes me is this is stuff that they should have already learned by the time they get to college, right? I mean, they should have a thorough understanding of the Declaration, but they don't. And you brought up, we hold these truths to be self-evident. And I think that's such an important concept because truth doesn't depend upon human acceptance to give it its binding force of validity. Yet today, the idea of truth has been murdered. It's been murdered by the Marxists, by the Democrats. We now have this new thing called my truth, which is the stupidest thing I've ever heard of, because if your truth conflicts with my truth, well, who's right? What entity, and you lay this out in your book, what entity has been the worst? I mean, you talk about Marxist influence in education, the media, the government. What entity has really been the driving force behind this? Or had the most impact?
Yeah, that's a really good question. So the Democrat Party, Democrat leadership, and many of the Democrats at the federal level have really driven the idea that government is the one that is supposed to give out the rights and liberties to American citizens. And that, though, would only go so far if you didn't have the public school system doing their part to dumb down a generation of thinkers, right? If you look at the public school system, which I've seen it up close and personal, I know you have as well. I have 4 kids. 3 of them went from K through 12 through public school system. The 4th one yanked in 6th grade when Barack Obama was president because she was afraid to use the bathroom at school because she thought a boy would be in there because of Barack Obama's brainchild of opening up the bathrooms to boys who wanted to pretend to be girls. And so, we couldn't have this Marxism creeping into America's political system if it wasn't with the acceptance of the younger generation who has grown to become America's new leaders. So the public school system is definitely something that has played a huge role in bringing this about. Second to that, I would say the media.
Yeah, and as the public school system focused more on ideology and creating activists, we've seen the scores plunge. We've seen proficiency levels at historic lows. Students don't know much, but it's about pushing an agenda that is interesting, right? Because you just brought up the whole trans debate about, boys and girls' bathrooms and locker rooms and stuff like that. I mean, 80% of the American public's against this. Like, how did this even become a debate? We shouldn't even have to waste time focusing on this issue, yet we do because of the powerful forces from the left.
Yeah, and here's why I think we are fighting a debate that never rightly should be waged in America. I look at the Christian community over the last few years as being too silent, too cowed into silence, too comfortable with pursuing the material gains and forgetting the matters of spirituality. Because if you hearken back to the founding fathers' intent in this nation with a form of limited government, they warned you could only keep government limited if the citizens were moral and virtuous. And who knows better about morality and virtue than those who hold faith, right? Otherwise, morality and virtue just becomes another politic. It becomes something that shifts in the wind. And so when you have Christians sitting out the political battles and saying, well, I live in this world, not of this world, and the Bible commands me to respect whoever our political leaders are because they're ordained by God, and other such skewings of biblical truths, then you have a culture that is immoral breeding a political world that is immoral. And this is how we get to this time in America where the idea of God-given individual rights and liberties becomes radicalized, and suddenly it just seems like something that is so far over the top.
And when it came to the coronavirus, how much damage do you think that the religious institutions did to themselves by allowing the government to dictate when and where and how people could exercise their faith?
Still gives me a physical reaction. I really get furious when I look out over America and I remember all the churches that closed down based on a local health bureaucrat's order, right? These were not duly passed laws through Congress or through even state legislatures or even at the local level. They were just a holier than thou, arrogant, pride-filled government bureaucrat telling churches you must shut down because the virus will kill people if you don't listen to me. And so when I saw the churches closed down, I was shocked. That was the one thing that shocked me out of the whole coronavirus crazy, because I thought in a nation that's founded, first off, on a quest for religious freedom, and then second off, on the idea of God-given rights and liberties, you remove the churches from that equation, and what do you have? That was just a symbol to me of how far we have strayed from founding father intents, and it was just a really dark wake-up call to the weakening of the churches and faith communities in America.
Well, you want me to really get your blood boiling? A few weeks ago, maybe a month or two ago, Emperor Cuomo, that was my governor, he was on the radio and he was saying, well, people didn't have to follow the mandates. It's not like they were laws that were passed, and so they could have ignored them. There was nothing we could do. How frustrating is it for someone like that to say that publicly now as opposed to when he was locking everything down.
That's what Anthony Fauci did from beginning to end to this day, right? He basically said, I'm a scientist, I'm not a policymaker, but anybody who dared to go against what his so-called scientific recommendations were, they came under the Anthony Fauci special treatment. If you remember back, Florida tried to reopen under Governor Ron DeSantis, and Anthony Fauci just, he rocked the media waves going everywhere saying people will die, people will die, people will die, because Governor Ron DeSantis isn't listening to the best medical science, meaning I am science, Fauci, meaning his words. And so that's exactly what Fauci did. And we cannot allow these people to gaslight what actually occurred under the coronavirus, because I still see people wearing face masks as they drive down the road by themselves. And I think to myself, they are so far gone. And it's just another sign that the whole coronavirus clamp down on liberties, it could happen again.
Oh, absolutely. And I say it all the time. How many, if tomorrow there was a breakout or something, how many people would just obey and comply, given everything they know today, all the lies that were pushed to the American people? But several interesting things happened. One was the exposure of the corruption of the schools and the pushing of Marxist ideology. Another interesting thing was the Catholic Church. The American Catholic Church has actually grown, despite the Vatican, more conservative, because when they shut down the churches, the people that came back were actual believers. They weren't like once in a while we're going to go to church on Sundays. Do you think that maybe there's a boomerang effect coming where we're going to see religious institutions actually grow more conservative?
I think the religious institutions that aren't afraid to speak biblical truths did grow after the coronavirus and will continue to grow. And particularly, I get optimistic when I hear President Trump talk about the need for us to reclaim our religion in America, and that God must be important in America. And he establishes a faith office in the White House just to send the narrative even further that America's link with faith goes way back to the beginning, and the lie from the left, separation of church and state, should not stand. So I do see churches, there is some backlash. I look at it as sort of God's way of winnowing out the weakness in his congregations. And so I see that as a good thing. And I'm looking to Donald Trump and what he's saying about God and faith and religion as optimistic for America.
And when it comes to Trump's executive order, creating an office of faith, how do you think it's going to work? What do you think's the most important task it's going to have on its hands?
Well, just to send the message that anti-Christian bias won't be tolerated, just to send the message out that the sort of subtle type of attacks that go forth on Christianity and religion in the public square won't be tolerated under this administration, because, the First Amendment doesn't say that you cannot bring your faith or your religion into the political square or into the public arena. It just guarantees that you're allowed to, and government can't establish a specific religion in America. So, I see really the messaging and the message that it sends out to Americans that faith is foremost for this White House as being a good thing.
Now, I mean, when I look at it, if I go back to the previous administration, there was an overt attack on faith and institutions. You had the FBI Richmond product, which was the Catholic memo, stating that Catholics have a proclivity for domestic violent extremism because of their belief in two genders and they're pro-life. And we saw the Biden administration actually take action against pro-life protesters, arresting them, doing SWAT-style raids on their homes, throwing people in prison. How important is it to get someone like Kash Patel in the FBI so that we could find out exactly how religion was targeted? People of faith were targeted under the last FBI director.
Oh, it's crucial because we also all saw the stories about parental rights being targeted, and if parents went to school boards and insisted on maintaining authority over the children, what they learned in school specifically about the LGBTQ agenda, those things that flew in direct conflict with Christian beliefs, we saw those parents identified by the weaponized systems under Joe Biden as almost akin to terrorists. And so this administration will do a lot to reverse that. We have to remember that the foundation of America, American exceptionalism, the idea of God-given individual liberties and rights, sort of puts a priority list of what comes first in America. And it's God, and then the individual, and then government to preserve and protect what God gives the individual. So if we can get those priorities back in order through the faith department and all the other systems that Donald Trump has brought forth excellent people for, then we really are doing a 180 in this nation over the evils of the previous Joe Biden and Barack Obama administrations.
Well, when we look at those two administrations, one of the things that I'm glad Trump is doing this, but at the same time, I recognize that anything he does can easily be undone by another administration, right? I mean, Joe Biden reversed a lot of Donald Trump's executive orders. Donald Trump reversed a lot of Joe Biden's executive orders. How important is it to get Congress involved in some of this, to pass legislation it's kind of in the Constitution that the government can't target people based on religion, but yet they do it anyway. But how important is it for Congress to get involved and start actually legislating to protect faith within our society?
So I'm not a big fan of executive orders. I don't like how past presidents and even the current president is using executive orders to do what Congress is supposed to be doing, Congress representing the will of the people, right? But that being said, Barack Obama abused the system. He was the pen and phone president, bragged about it. Donald Trump came in and overturned many of the Barack Obama initiatives, only to see his initiatives overturned by Joe Biden. So here we are again. And now this is crucial that Congress step in and do their legislative duty and take many of the executive orders that Donald Trump has signed in line with the Constitution and in line with individual liberties and codify them, right? Make them into law so we don't have to face this same battle when the next time a Democrat is in the White House. And I would just add to that really quickly that a citizenry that understands God-given individual liberties and rights, that understands that government is only there to preserve what they have at birth, they would never allow Congress or a president or their political leaders to play these political games every 4 years anyhow. So really, we as citizens need to sort of reorient a little bit and recognize Donald Trump's great, right? But let's start talking about God-given, because that's really where the future of our long-term liberties lie.
And I think that's critical. I mean, going back to what you said earlier, you go back to the 1960s and the idea of separation in church and state was pushed on the education system, on all students going through it, where you rightly pointed out, no, Congress just can't make any laws respecting the establishment of a state-sponsored religion. That's what it really comes down to. But our religion, I mean, let's face it, how we grow up, the values that are instilled in us through faith or whatever, it influences the decisions we make as we get older, including policy. Like a lot of people say, you got to keep religion and policy separate. No, it influences our decision making when it comes to policy. And then you factor in the last 2 decades, ever since 9/11, where people were taught to be obedient and compliant to the government, as opposed to being skeptical and questioning the government. How do we begin to fix that? Because I think that's the most important thing. You talk about a citizenry, an informed citizenry. Well, obviously, our citizenry is not very informed anymore.
Yeah, and you asked the $100,000 question, right? Because honestly, there is no quick fix. We didn't get here overnight. We got here over a slow morph that quickened under certain administrations like Barack Obama and like Joe Biden. But this has been a slow crawl to this point in America where, we have a generation that have come out of high school, gone on to college, where by and large the administration there is left-leaning leading, and now they're leading in America, some of the key models and systems in America. So look, we got to start with the family units. We got to start as parents. We have to do our due diligence as parents and teach our kids biblical truths, right, along with the Constitution, and show them how to apply those principles to the day to day. You know, when I turn on the news, my filters are the Bible and Constitution, and whatever happens in the news, how does it align with those two, those two standards? And so it starts with the family, but we really have to do reform of the public school system. And, the media, I can't emphasize the media. The media has taken a very deep role in turning America down this path of dark leftism. And if you're watching media that you can support, like shows like yours, I say conservatives, stop just crying about the media and start putting your money where the media is actually doing the pro-America type of reporting that we need.
Yeah, I don't understand, why a bunch of political activists have infiltrated. I mean, I understand why, but people need to recognize that what they see on CNN and MSNBC, these are political activists. They're not journalists. Let's be honest about that. And the media has evolved. It always had its biases. But I was listening to a couple of Clinton speeches just a few days ago. And I'm like, oh my God, he sounds like a conservative today.
Yes.
I mean, how much has the mentality changed in the United States over the course of the 30 years? I mean, Bill Clinton really sounded like a hardcore conservative.
Yeah, the Democrat Party of today, it's definitely not like JFK, but it's not even like Bill Clinton, right? Bill Clinton did not hate America. He governed from a more pragmatic point of view, too left for me, and his morals were really decrepit, but he didn't hate America. And that's the difference. And that's where I think Barack Obama did the most damage in recent presidential times, because he came at the presidency with a promise to change the foundations of America, which basically meant ripping up everything that we stand for in America and bringing in this Marxist, communist, collectivist type of activism government. And so, look, we didn't get here overnight, and we're not going to get out of this, but Donald Trump in the White House is a good start. And now citizens can take it on themselves to start bringing forth the narrative of God-given individual liberties, and insisting on our political class recognize that too.
It seems that many Democrats haven't learned any lesson in the past election. Listening to them today, I mean, they're still sitting there talking about that we should be spending millions of dollars of trans surgeries in Guatemala. I mean, it hasn't penetrated them. But you lay out in the book about the consequences of neglecting the foundational principles of the country, including the religious foundation of the country. Can you explain to the audience what happens if we continue to neglect these principles going forward?
Well, we lose our nation. I mean, there's no way around it, right? The land of America is not just a piece of property, right? America is not just a parcel of land. It's a spirit. It's a spirit of individualism. And, if it's not individualism, then it's collectivism. Those are the two opposites there. I pit it as God-given versus government-granted, but you can look at it as individualism versus collectivism. And you cannot have America where individual freedoms are recognized and upheld by this supposedly subservient political class if you have an America that does not have a thriving faith community that insists on God-given and not government-granted.
And I have to ask, are you more optimistic today that maybe we will get in touch with these foundational principles than you were, let's say, 3 or 4 months ago?
Yeah, I am. So, I mean, how can you not be? It's like yin and yang, right? I mean, it's, dark and light again. We really do have 4 years now under Donald Trump where we at least have somebody fighting for us so we can go about our business without having to wage battle after battle after battle every day. But like I said, this is not time to just, relax and sit back and count our 401ks as they grow. It's time to reorient and start looking to the things of the spirit, because that's where our long-term liberty comes from.
And I think this touches on that optimism in your book. One of the things that we are witnessing, and I think it's a little bit surprising, is the younger generation. It's turning out that the younger Americans actually lean more conservative than previous cohorts. That younger Americans are actually seeking out faith compared to older Americans, that it seems like the younger people, they lost their sense of purpose and now they're trying to rediscover it. Do you feel that same thing is happening?
I do. I took a lot of optimism when I saw those sort of, groundswell on college campuses of students doing the baptisms. They would hold the prayer rallies, and they only had planned on holding a prayer vigil for maybe an hour, but then it turned into days and days, and then they started having public baptisms, and all that is just it's just good for the moral fiber of America, but it just bears well on the backlash of this younger generation. The previous the younger generation, I forget which one is the millennial generation was embracing socialism, right? And then we were seeing that their kids were embracing socialism. Now we're having a backlash against that. And that's just good for America's liberties, really.
Well, I think the obvious, when you move away from family, we've moved away from faith, we've seen depression, anxiety increase, the sense of purpose be driven from society, and people starting to wake up. Everyone needs to check out God-Given or Bust, Defeating Marxism and Saving America with Biblical Truths. Cheryl, I really enjoyed the conversation. Thank you so much for coming on.
Thank you. Thank you, Nick.
Thank you for listening to the P.A.S. Report. Don't forget to rate, share, and hit that subscribe button. That way you'll never miss an episode. For more exclusive content and updates, visit us at PASreport.com and follow Professor Giordano on all social media platforms at P.A.S. Report.